In the current day, text, emails, social media, and whatever else you could possibly name to allow near instant communication has connected us across the globe. If you want to lump telegrams into this group, then there is still roughly a century that we have been able to talk to each other rapidly from around the world. Despite the speed of messages, when it comes to physical goods, there's still a cap on how fast your 248th Funko Pop of Hatsune Miku can arrive to your house. Still, the way of the post office, while vital to this role, have began to decline from their use of non-formal communications. By the early 2000s, this speed in its decline was continuing to grow as the internet began to take hold. However, there is some nostalgia for this older form of communication. Blame anyone trying to be vintage, or any elderly preferring the way that they know. There are some who want to thank the post office for its centuries of work. In 2004, Terry Pratchett published Going Postal as his 33rd novel in the Discworld series. Taking place, of course, in Ankh-Morpork, where many of the stories also of the Discworld take place, the local post office has been forgotten and fell into ruin, as preference to the newer clacks, which are a form of fantasy manually operated telegram towers, have began to take hold. And while it's not the best way of summarizing how that works, the point is that they are everywhere. So, what Pratchett ends up doing is creating a story that covers the conflict of newer messaging systems with that of older ones. Additionally, there is a secondary story of redemption, asking what actions need to be done in order for a person to be redeemed, along with when a person is irredeemable, based on how popular recent games such as Red Dead Redemption and other media have been, is incredibly popular amongst audiences. And lastly, before we get into this Pratchett package of a postal parable, there is an uncommon item for Discworld books, which this one is privy to, being that of chapters. Now, if you have read a Discworld book in the past, you would know that Pratchett simply prefers to just cut off paragraphs, leaving sections for when different scenes take place, rather than using chapters, which in this book, he does so. Now again, with any summary, just to quickly preface, I'm not going to cover everything from the book in its entirety. There are smaller plot points that I will address once this is done. However, for the sake of this summary, we will largely be focusing on the protagonist. As with those formalities out of the way, this is Going Postal by Sir Terry Pratchett. Down in the dungeon of Ankh-Morpork, the wall of a prison cell is continually chipped away. A young man who occupies this cell is on all fours with a spoon, turning bricks into a dust with the hope of freedom. And today is a big day for this young man, as the cons and scams that he has ran have caught up with him, and as thanks, he is to receive an execution. The young man is, of course, our protagonist, who was captured under the alias of Alfred Spangler. Now put a pin in that name, as it will be important later. As for his real name, it is Moist von Lipwig, or Lipwig, and yes, he does hate his name too. Yet in spite of terrible names, the digging continues, as thankfully, there's a big enough hole that after taking a peek through to the other side, there is another spoon to encourage the hope of escape. This realization is swiftly followed by two guards chuckling at the ordeal that they have seen many a time before. Yet, despite the humiliation, it's time for Mr. Spangler's clock to stop ticking, as an executioner is waiting for him with a rope that he has his name on. Technically not yet, as he does ask for it to be signed before the proper procedures are gone through. As before events can get underway, Moist, or Alfred in this case, has offered his last words, which he declares, quote, "I condemn my soul to any god that can find it," end quote. So, with that, the lever is flipped and the floor drops out underneath, as the noose does its work and the light fades from the eyes of Moist von Lipwig, bringing an end to our honest con man. As, in addition, it brings an end to Going Postal. Or it would, as against all common understanding of being hanged, our con man wakes up, still breathing. Upon regaining consciousness in the office of the partition, Veterinari, they welcome Moist back from the land of the dead and back into the land of the living. To further confuse the con man of his situation, to help clear up this situation, however, Moist goes ahead and asks how he could still possibly be alive, which simply don't hang someone to completion. Just let them pass out and drag their body back to the office. However, the reason being is that Veterinari has an offer for Mr. Lipwig regarding his future. He can either choose to work at the Ankh-Morpork post office and help rebuild it back to its former glory, or he can stand up and leave out the door behind him, walking right out of the partition's office. Veterinari does sweeten the deal that, regardless, Alfred Spangler is officially declared dead and Moist von Lipwig has a clear record making him a free man. However, before a decision is properly made, Moist goes ahead and merely opens the door, only to be met by a drop dozens of stories high. So, correct in the assumption, the door is shut, and Moist von Lipwig accepts the deal to become in charge of the Ankh-Morpork post office. Now, why in the name of the crocodile god are we hiring a convicted con man to run our failing post office? That is an incredibly silly question when you recall what city you're in, especially who is in charge. Doubly so is, again, Moist von Lipwig is a free man. However, the reason why the post office has declined so much is due to the Grand Trunk Company holding a monopoly on the Clax Tower. This lovely little invention is, again, very similar to that of a telegram system. And along with that, and any information that comes with them, has allowed them to become incredibly profitable. Heading this operation is Reacher Gilt, who has Scrooge McDuck amounts of money mixed with the morality of Baron Harkonnen from Dune. So if that description fails to spell it out, then know that this has led to more enemies than I have time to list. A common reason being is that in order for the Clax to run, you often need people younger who can both climb into the tower and be in their smaller spaces for extended periods of time. However, with the towers, hundreds, possibly thousands have lost their lives on those very towers, accidentally or not. And when you tell a mother that her child is now gone, it means a mother that you have scorned. And this is the very opposition that Veterinari wishes to potentially bring an end to, or merely just remind them of their place. So, with the newfound freedom that he has been granted, Moist immediately does as anyone would, and skip town. Getting outside of the city, he's able to find an inn where he is able to go ahead and sleep for the night and think of his next steps. However, during the middle of the night, he is awoken as a large, dark figure with eyes that seem to be perpetually burning causes a little bit of a scare, as it is so much of a scare, in fact, that Moist ends up hurling himself out a window and breaks his ankle. This beast of a figure, unfazed by this, dives out the window as well, unharmed, snatching up Moist and dragging him all the way back to the city. As upon losing consciousness on the way back due to both injury and how tired he is, eventually he does wake up back in the office of Veterinari, as it is here that Veterinari mentions that this individual that did bring you back is Mr. Pump, being a clay golem and, most importantly, his parole officer. So, accepting defeat, Moist decides to go to the post office properly this time. The office itself is frankly a disgrace to what it may have once been. The sign is missing letters, the paint is clinging to life as if it's a stubborn grandmother, and, no surprises here, it smells awful. Waiting inside is a goblin of a man named Mr. Garrote, who prefers natural medicines over that of modern practices, which, being in Ankh-Morpork, honestly might be smarter than most. However, it leaves him smelling like month-old salad drenched in vinegar, anchovies, and left in a shoe under the sun for a week. To assist him is a young man, Stanley, who is obsessed with cleanliness and pins. The two are a bit of an odd pairing. However, both men are the only remaining employees of the post office, as their obsession has kept them there for years. Now, while the common understanding of a post office is to send out letters, none have been sent in decades. The reason being is that there are too many letters for two men to do, and how could they send out letters all day long when there are still tasks at the post office that need to be done, like feeding the cat or refilling inkwells? So, this leads to letters piling up out of desks and drawers, and now all the way up to the ceiling where they are today. Aside from this information of the post office, the two employees are curious about what Moist has done before coming to work with them, as to see what credentials he has for joining the dynamic duo. Before he can get a proper answer out, a brief thought runs through Moist's mind. Quote, rob, trick, forge, embezzle, but never, and this was important, using any kind of violence. Never. Moist had always been careful about that. He tried not to sneak either, if he could avoid it. Being caught at 1 a.m. in a bank's deposit vault while wearing a black suit with lots of little pockets in it could be considered suspicious. So why do it? With careful planning, the right suit, the right papers, and above all, the right manner, you could walk into the place at midday and the manager would hold open the door for you when you left. Palming rings and exploiting the stupidity of the rural stupid was just a way of keeping his hand in. It was the face. That was what it was. He had an honest face, and he loved those people who looked him firmly in the eyes to see his inner self, because he had a lot of inner selves, one for every occasion. As for firm handshakes, practice had given him one to which you could moor boats. It was people skills. That's what it was. Special people skills. Before you could sell glass as diamonds, you had to make people really want to see diamonds. That was the trick. The trick of all tricks. You changed the way people saw the world. You let them see it the way they wanted it to be. How the hell had Vetinari known his name? The man had cracked von Lipwig like an egg, and the watch here were demonic. As for setting a golem on a man, I was a clerk. End quote. Now, resume and Moist aside, his curiosity of Mr. Pump has him seeking out experts on golems before he properly gets to work. So, hitting the local streets, he has met exactly what he is looking for in the Golem Trust. As against the welcoming appearance, which is in a similar state of the post office with a busted window, telling Moist of a recent break-in, the warm welcome is doubled down on when, upon walking through the door, a crossbow bolt embeds itself in the wall just centimeters away from his skull. With his hands immediately thrown up, a feminine figure emerges from the shadow. A tall, younger woman with a tight black bun holding a crossbow due to the obviously recent robbery, and smelling as though she just smoked a pack of cigarettes 5 minutes prior. The owner of said crossbow, as well as the Golem Trust, is Miss Adora Bell Dearheart, obvious pun of a name intended by her parents. She recalls actually being familiar with Mr. Pump, as Moist immediately brings him up, as, of course, he knows of golems, and they are a relatively new presence in Ankh-Morpork, but within the past 48 hours, he has interacted with them the most in his entire life. And from what he can deduce, that isn't going to change anytime soon. As for the expert of Miss Dearheart, before she begins telling Moist about golems, she of course lights a cigarette, before informing him, and us, exactly what golems are. In short, they are clay men with words placed on a tablet, with said tablet being placed inside, typically, their skull, causing their bodies to become alive. They are a sort of robot to the Discworld, who all live to work, but to seek freedom from work. They work to be free, not as a slave, but as if it's a retirement that just turns into a new job. Being that golems aren't human, they don't need to sleep, breathe, drink, or eat. They walk at 4 miles an hour, which averages out to over 600 miles a week. And while they don't harm, it comes with a bit of a loophole unless done by a higher authority. And as for Mr. Pump, he spent his days underwater taking on the role of a pump, giving him his name. As the information is finished, so is Miss Dearheart's cigarette, As dropping it into an ashtray, Moist thanks her for the information, and upon leaving the Gollum Trust, he immediately notices an odd feeling, one that leaves him, as he does so with the store, as it was a certain fondness that he felt for Miss Dearheart in that brief moment that he met her. As he returns to the post office, however, he notices that a barber shop nearby is sporting some familiar letters to advertise it. Letters from the post office. With his persuasive skills and knowledge of the law, Moist lets the owner know that not only could he be in serious trouble for what is stealing from not just the post office, but from government property. So at least the sign is put back, but if this corpse of a post office is going to properly be resurrected one day, he'll need a way to fund the post office. Thus, Moist comes up with the conclusion that, quote, "The only way I can get out of this is by running forward, not going back. Bloody veterinary. There's a way to win this. He could make money. He was part of the government, wasn't he? Governments took money off people. That's what they were for. He had people skills, didn't he? He could persuade people that brass was gold, that he had got a bit tarnished, that glass was a diamond, that tomorrow there was free beer. He'd outfox them all. He wouldn't try to escape, not yet. If a golem could buy its freedom, so could he. He'd buckle down and bustle and look busy, and he'd send all the bills to veterinary, because this was government work. How could the man object?" End quote. After this realization, Mr. Garrote happens to become quite frustrated with Moist for actually doing the job of the post office. As the two become more heated in their argument, Mr. Pump, who has the duty to make sure that Moist is safe, ends up holding a heavy kettle above Mr. Garrote, threatening to bring it down on the man. However, before that threat is able to be properly delivered, Moist ends the argument and forces Mr. Pump to put the kettle down, as instead, he pivots over to the golem, furious as to why he would do such a thing, with the golem having this dialogue. Quote, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Moist shouted. "You can't just go around killing people."
"Why not? You do."
The golem lowered his arms. "What?" Moist snapped. "I do not! Who told you that?"
"I worked it out. You have killed 2.338 people,"
said the golem calmly. "I have never laid a finger on anyone in my life, Mr. Pump. I may be all things I know I am, but I am not a killer. I have never so much as drawn a sword."
"You have not, but you have stolen, embezzled, defrauded, and swindled without discrimination, Mr. Lipwig. You have ruined businesses and destroyed jobs. When banks fail, it is seldom bankers who starve. Your actions have taken money from those who had little enough to begin with. In a myriad small ways you have hastened the deaths of many. You do not know them, you do not see them bleed, but you have snatched bread from their mouths and torn clothes from their backs. For sport, Mr. Lipwig. For sport. For the joy of the game."
End quote. Obviously, Veterinary isn't the only one who knows Moist's crimes, as Mr. Pump is able to calculate far better than most humans and come to that very conclusion. To add to that, he sees the world as it is. Despite Moist's promise to never do violence, the ripple in the pond of his actions have led to harm. So, it's up to him to determine if bringing the post office back can redeem himself from his life of scams. Philosophical questions can wait, however. As with the Discworld, words do have power. Moist, feeling the influence of these words giving him visions, decides to properly deliver one letter to a nearby grocery store, as visions continue to do so, as he decides it would be best to properly deliver these letters. It seems that Mr. Garrote has come around to also doing so, as both he and Stanley gather older postmen to officially welcome Moist to the position, and they do so through a postman's form of hazing. Through rain, angry dogs, and heavy bags, this council of gentlemen all agree that Moist is fit to be a postman, and so do the letters, as they use their words to let Moist deliver them, and that he will be not just a postman, but the postmaster. He will deliver all of these letters. While mystical visions may be fantastic, Moist does get a proper uniform for his official position. A suit with a hat and tiny wings, with the whole thing covered in gold that has chipped away in a few ages, but it is still a bright spotlight that the postmaster has to wear. The whole getup turns Moist into the mascot of the post office, as he realizes that while it does force a spotlight on him, it gives him further confidence in his future. To help secure hope for this future, Moist decides to go ahead and design stamps for new and incoming letters to the office. And while Mr. Garrod is cautious based on some people joking and offering up money to send letters all the way across the disk, Moist does point out that they paid for the stamp, so the joke's on them. As the stamps do gain traction, Moist decides to hire more golems from Miss Deerheart, and the local newspaper reports on the work that he has done. Said reports lead Mr. Lipwig into Vetinari's office, where the partition notes that Mr. Lipwig is putting on and respects the fact that in the latest printing, the Grand Trunk and their clacks were claimed to be slower than the post office. It's with this very claim that Vetinari wishes to see if the dumpster fire of the post office will manage to return to glory, or if it's just another step in the inevitable dumpster fire of the post office. To further assist with this uphill battle are seeming leaks from a group known as the Smoking Gun, spelled GNU, who inform Moist occasionally of when the clacks are down, as this gives him enough confidence that Moist decides to make a claim of sending mail to the neighboring town of Stolot within the very day. Obviously, since there are no planes, trains, and automobiles, the dear postmaster is forced to find a noble steed to take him across the disk, despite the short distance. This leads us to being introduced to Boris, who has the temper of a raging bull set on fire and has recently lost all of his money at a casino. As for the why of Moist getting such an honor to ride the calm Boris, it's because when you strut into a stable and demand the fastest horse, you get Boris, who while certainly is the fastest horse, it does come with his gentle temper. Both Moist and the stable workers happen to point Boris down the road right out of Ankh-Morpork, with a crowd gathering to witness the postmaster's journey, as he makes one final ask to the stable hands to further up the ante by removing Boris's saddle. As a quick aside for those unaware, riding a horse without a proper saddle, or as it's named bareback, is a practice that isn't recommended, as the bounding motion of a horse can be quite uncomfortable, even debilitating, depending on how long your ride is. So for Moist, who will spend hours upon Boris, it's not going to be a fun ride. Despite this all, Moist still mounts up, as, with a brief moment of clarity coming across his mind, he thinks to himself about the whole ordeal that he is currently facing. Quote, "Look at this," Moist thought. "What have you got to lose? Your life? You've already been hanged. You're in angel time, and you're impressing the hell out of everybody. Why are they buying stamps? Because you're giving them a show." End quote. It's as this adrenaline is blasting, with the crowd fully invested in the show that Moist has put on for them, that he decides to further raise the stakes. Gazing out into the crowd, Moist happens to spot Miss Deerheart and asks her if she would be willing to join him for dinner. With oohs and ahs from the crowd, she gives him a simple nod, as Moist informs the stable hands to release Boris as the ropes are dropped, and the two accelerate rapidly out of the city. The actual ride isn't terrible, as Boris does eventually calm down upon exiting the city, as the towers of the clacks are used as checkpoints for their journey. Eventually arriving in Stolot isn't so glamorous for Moist, as upon getting off of Boris, dumping bags and bags of letters at their post office, he demands a freezing cold bath for his groin. After a few hours of being in said bath, collecting more letters and returning back to Ankh-Morpork, Moist enjoys the ride back far more than his previous one, as he's able to sneak a saddle on Boris before eventually dumping it as he gets near Ankh-Morpork. Now, while Moist has been hard at work, he isn't the only one to do so, as Reacher Gilt hasn't been too happy with how the clacks have been treating him. With shutdown after shutdown, it's left him increasingly more frustrated, as there appears to be no end in sight of when their issue will be resolved. So, in an attempt to get rid of the competition in the post office, he hires Mr. Gryle, a tall, lanky, and hunched man with a knack for being able to make people vanish overnight. Reacher has been trying to find anything on Moist von Lipwig, but due to his con man past, he is a ghost that just miraculously appeared, and is becoming much more than a thorn in his side. So, with what little they know about the postmaster, they do know for certain that he lives in the post office that is still filled to the brim with old letters. As for Moist, who has arrived back in town, he scrambles to put together a proper outfit for his date with Miss Dearheart, and since he did have a long horse ride, he was able to come up with a plan. Now, if one was to assume that Moist would have already made reservations, then you'd be sorely mistaken, as using some skills from a previous life, Moist forges a letter from Reacher Guilt for both Miss Dearheart and Mr. Lipwig, which works wonders. The night for the two is surprisingly wonderful, as despite the largely professional context which they know each other, they are grateful for the change of pace. The reason being why Miss Dearheart hates Reacher and is so willing to assist Moist is due to the fact that the Clacks have robbed her of both her father and brother, and Reacher being the sole reason that everything else is gone. Reasons for her interest in Moist's side, she asks about Moist's interest with her, and why this flamboyant postal worker with no past has just dropped into her life. As the music of dinner continues, Moist thinks to himself, quote, "Because you called me a phony?" Moist thought. "Because you saw through me straight away. Because you didn't nail my head to the door with your crossbow. Because you have no small talk. Because I'd like to get to know you better, even though it would be like smooching an ashtray. Because I wonder if you could put into the rest of your life the passion you put into smoking cigarettes. In defiance of Miss Macalaria, I'd like to commit hanky-panky with you, Miss Adora Belle Dearheart. Well, certainly hanky, and possibly panky when we get to know each other better. I'd like to know as much about your soul as you know about mine." He said, "Because I hardly know you." End quote. Sadly for the two, they happen to be informed that the person whose name they put down to get them a table, Reacher Guilt, wants to express his thanks to the duo for accepting his invite to dinner. Obviously, Reacher isn't a fool, as he would recall sending an invite to his business rival for him and a +1 to dinner at an expensive restaurant and put it on his tab. Under these circumstances, anyone would understandably break into a rage over what has happened, but not Reacher. As with his previously mentioned plan with Mr. Gryle, he simply wishes for the two to have a lovely night and hopes that their future of the Postal Service doesn't go up in flames, and presumably making a Dr. Evil-esque face as he does so. Picking up on the obvious hint, though, Moist makes haste back to the post office, where it has been set ablaze. Without even a second thought, Moist leaps into the blaze to save whatever he possibly can. Among the thousands on thousands of letters, Moist is only able to grab so much, especially the post office cat, who is a bit more important than letters on fire. Now, Mr. Gryle the arsonist has planned on murdering Moist, but is willing to add the cat to that body count. As, down from the rafters, he dives onto the duo. As he lands on the two, the floor breaks under their combined weight as they fall into the basement. Everyone present gets back to their 2 or 4 legs, coughing up smoke and ash alike, as Moist, being the expert martial artist that he is, thanks the gods that he's wearing his yellow pants, as he meets eyes with Mr. Gryle, who we find out is a banshee. Unwilling to let the fall get to him, he shows his claws and dives towards Moist. To the shock of both of them, Moist also dives towards Mr. Gryle as the two connect, with the banshee going over top of Moist and into the machinery of the post office, and officially meeting his end. An end which gives him more holes than Swiss cheese used as target practice. The victory, however, will have to wait, as the building is still very much so on fire, and it is time for everyone to take their leave. Upon heading out, the post office crumbles behind Moist, as he is not only a hero to the crowd, but he also shares in a brief maniacal dance with Miss Dearheart. which confuses her, but as the night begins to turn to day, and rain refuses to let any sunshine on the post office, if there's ever going to be a post office again, there's going to need to be a miracle. And it's that very thought process that has Moist come to a realization. Early in the morning, he falls to his knees, calling out to any gods above the disc. Just like with his last words, Moist begs to any god that all he needs is a meager $150,000 to repair the post office. Now, to clarify, Moist is no religious man, but he's merely busy visiting every major temple that morning. And by that afternoon, it leads him into Vetinari's office. Because, if the partition is mistaken, which he never is, then, after going to every temple, Moist strutted directly out of Ankh-Morpork. Of course, as he did so, a crowd interested in what the postmaster was up to, and, given that he waltzed to a tree, dug a hole into the ground, only to find the exact amount of $150,000, is an impressive feat. Word, however, has reached the partition that the gold actually is a lost stash of a former con man, known as Alfred Spangler. Now, to undo that pin and remind you, that was the very identity that Moist was going by during his execution. So for him to know this location isn't divine guidance, and instead creating a story. Vetinari does clarify the treasure's previous owner, which Moist counters by recalling that Spangler was recently hung, which makes the money up for grabs, as he and the partition both agree that the gold is free, but the priests of those major temples will likely expect a donation as thanks for the miracle. So grumble all he like about having to give some of the money away, he's got more than enough to repair the post office. Upon giving away the money to both donations and repairs, it's time to bring an end to this competition. And that is the exact thought process of Reacher. As, in a manner to put the post office out of business, he asks for a race between paper and clack. As of course the challenge reaches across the whole city, Moist does know that on paper, this feat is impossible, as despite the speed of Boris, even he cannot beat Clax. And this bet is one that Moist von Lipwig is bound to lose, and Reacher Guilt knows it. However, with his showman history, there is one final trick that Moist might be able to pull off. The plan, however, is currently under development, as obviously it needs to be something showy, but he's stumped, until he gets another letter from the Smoking Gun, who he is able to find out through Mr. Grote are 3 previous Clax workers, who are willing to assist him with constructing a fake tower and intercepting the message that the Grand Trunk sends out for their competition, as there will only be one message sent by Clack on that day, and there will be a wizard waiting on the other side to read it when it comes through. So when the time finally rolls around, the competition begins, and Moist races to oversee the interception and pass along a letter they are going to send instead. Upon reaching their destination and handing over the letter, Moist decides to get into more inconspicuous clothing rather than that of his standard uniform, as sneaking back into the city and witnessing the partition, members of the Grand Trunk, and a few wizards who are waiting to hear the proper winner. The message of the Clax, of course, makes it through. Due to the fact that it is not the message that they intended, the wizard, on the other hand, is told to read it. And while there are some interruptions, what we do know of the message is exactly what follows. Quote, "Who will listen to the dead? We who died so that words could fly demand justice now. These are the crimes of the board of the Grand Trunk: theft, embezzlement, breach of trust, corporate murder. There was no safety, there was no pride, all there was money. Everything became money, and money became everything. Money treated us as if we were things, and we died. Blood oils the machinery of the Grand Trunk, as willing Loyal people pay with their lives for the board's culpable stupidity. Unaware of the toll that is being taken, what can we say of the men that caused this, who sat in comfort around their table and killed us by the numbers? Men obtained control of the trunk via a ruse known as the double lever, in the main using money entrusted to them by clients who did not suspect that. End quote. The reason why said quote is cut off is because Veterinari has heard enough, and all members of the Grand Trunk are to be held in the dungeon until a proper trial and evidence are able to be gathered. Of course, as the time goes on, all members are found guilty, and the post office, through this technicality, does end up winning. After winning the competition, though, the post office does continue on, as, for both Mr. Lipwig and Miss Deerheart, the occasional few dates are still had, as it looks like the future of the post office is one that is to remain bright. As for Reacher Guilt, his execution does come. As bright and early in the morning, Reacher Guilt is officially hanged in Ankh-Morpork. However, he does eventually wake up in the office of the partition Veterinari. Now, unlike Moist von Lipwig, it seems that Reacher Guilt doesn't share the same enthusiasm of working for the government that Moist von Lipwig does. As it's with that little story of the epilogue that officially brings us to the end of Going Postal. As I said at the start of this video, there were elements that I did not touch upon in great detail, as I wanted to largely focus this on Moist himself, and being that this is over 40 minutes long, I decided that it would be best to again focus on the protagonist. Should you be interested in reading the book, which I highly recommend you do so, I'll be sure to put links to where you can purchase it in the description. However, if you're able to find it or order it at a local bookstore, I highly recommend you do so. Again, the story in itself is one that leaves the question of, did everything that Moist do redeem him for all the crimes that he committed? As with any story written by Pratchett, he leaves that question up to you to decide. Additionally, this is the first of 3 books following Moist, and while I have not read those other 2 books in the series, I am greatly looking forward to them. But, with all that aside, the book in and of itself is one towards the end of Pratchett's life that he wrote, and based on the version that I was using, there were also minor illustrations at the start of each chapter going over some of the stamps that Moist came up with. And also, such a odd first name for a character did take some getting used to for myself, and I know that for some of you hearing me constantly say the first name of Mr. Lipwig is something that might turn some people off to the series, which I don't blame you if it does. I merely hope that you can enjoy the story that is being told. But with all that aside, I know I've kept you around here long enough. However, one last thing before I officially end this. Should you be interested, this episode, as well as previous and future episodes, will be going up on Spotify as well, also under the same title of Some Guy Summarizes. So, if you're somebody who would prefer to listen to this or previous episodes, or future episodes of course, whilst doing homework, on your drive to work, feel free to check out the Spotify there. But then again, I do appreciate you watching this on YouTube. However, this is all from me today, and as always, y'all are amazing.